Hey Sugar Geeks, Liz here. Today we are going to be making the most amazing chocolate cake ever, death by chocolate cake. I mean, if you're gonna die, that's the way I'd wanna go, right? I promise you, this cake does not taste like coffee, does not taste like mayonnaise, it just tastes like chocolate. It's the most intense chocolate cake you've ever tasted. It's coming up next on the Sugar Geek Show. So the first thing we're gonna do before we make our death by chocolate cake is we are going to measure out all of our ingredients because there are many of them. This is the best chocolate cake you've ever had, but it's not the easiest. So to make it easier on us, we're going to pre-measure everything using a kitchen scale for the ultimate accuracy. And we're also gonna make sure all of our ingredients are room temperature. So we want our mayonnaise, our eggs, our butter, all to be as close to the same temperature as possible so that when we mix them, they come together and make a delicious cake instead of repelling each other and turning into a curdled, watery, sad mess. If you want to learn more about using a scale to measure ingredients for baking, click the link above. Okay, so now let's get started. Our beer is at room temperature, nice and warm. You can take this out the day before even. This has never even been in the fridge, so it's definitely warm. I'm using Guinness and espresso powder to make the liquid for this cake. It's gonna really intensify the taste of the chocolate. You will not taste the Guinness, you will not taste the espresso powder. If you don't wanna use those two things, you can use cold coffee or you could just use straight water, but it's not gonna have that super strong chocolate flavor. Like, just trust me. So, beer, espresso powder, and vanilla. If you don't have espresso powder, you can also use instant coffee. Just follow the directions on the container for how much to use for 14 ounces of water or beer. So if you don't drink beer, you might not know this about Guinness, is it smells like chocolate. So it already has chocolate undertones, and that's why I chose Guinness to use in this chocolate cake. But really any dark stout beer is gonna work great. All right, so now I'm going to sift together my flour and the cocoa powder. This is Dutch cocoa powder, baking soda, and salt. Dutch cocoa powder has a more intense chocolate flavor than just regular Hershey's, but if you want to use Hershey's, you can just replace the baking powder in the recipe with baking soda. So I'm gonna go ahead and sift together the flour, the cocoa powder, baking soda, and salt. All right, so now we're gonna start assembling our ingredients together. I'm using my Bosch mixer, which holds quite a bit of batter and frosting, and it's nice and powerful. So I really like using this, but if you have a KitchenAid mixer, you can totally do the same thing. If you have a hand mixer, you can use it too. Just don't be afraid of mixing too much. A lot of people worry about mixing too much, and that causes cakes to fall or collapse in the center. So mix just as much with the Bosch as you would with a KitchenAid, and if you're using a hand mixer, I would even mix a little bit more just to make sure that you're mixing everything together properly. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add my softened room temperature butter into the bowl, turn that on and cream it. Now I'm gonna start sprinkling in the sugar slowly as it's mixing so that the sugar doesn't clump up and get all weird. But we're just gonna do that until it's nice and white and fluffy. This can take from 3 to 5 minutes depending on the strength of your mixer. So just go by look, don't go by time. So once your butter and sugar looks like this, nice and fluffy and aerated, we can go ahead and start adding in our eggs and the mayo. So now we're going to mix and start adding in our eggs one at a time. Let them mix fully before adding in the next. If you see some like water and separating at this point, it probably means that your eggs were a little bit too cold. So you'd want to take out like a cup of this batter and warm it in the microwave for 15 seconds or so and then add it back in so that your batter is not curdled. The mayo, which is basically eggs and oil. So if you ever see mayonnaise in a cake recipe, it's just adding in more eggs and more oil so that your cake is super moist. It's like a chocolate cake secret. If you don't have any mayonnaise, you can use Greek yogurt or sour cream instead, but the mayonnaise is going to make it the most moist. The moistest. The moister? Beautiful. So now we're gonna start adding dry ingredients and wet ingredients. We're basically just incorporating a little bit of each one at a time so that they both get incorporated evenly. If I were to just dump all the dry ingredients in here, it would just get very, very dry. And then by the time we add in liquids, then we would have like soupy pockets. So we're just gonna do little bits at a time of both so that they incorporate together evenly. This is a traditional mixing method. That was a little hectic. So once everything's combined and looking smooth and creamy, you can go ahead and add in your mini chocolate chips or half mini, half chopped regular chocolate if you ran out of minis like I did. We're using minis so that the batter suspends them evenly throughout. The big chocolate chips tend to sink to the bottom. It smells so good. I'm excited that I get to eat this. All right, so now I'm going to pour my batter into my 3 8-inch by 2-inch cake rounds. This is enough. It's like a little bit less batter than you would normally use in 3 8 inches, but I don't want my layers to be super thick. But you can use the cake calculator right above recipe card to adjust this recipe to any size cake pan you want. You're welcome. Click here for the blog post. So I'm just gonna coat my pan in some cake goop. You can get this recipe on sugargeekshow.com. It is super easy to make. Cake goop is just equal parts vegetable shortening, vegetable oil or canola oil, and flour. A little piece of parchment paper in there just because sometimes the chocolate chips make the cake stick to the bottom of the pan. So each cake pan is gonna take about 3 1/3 cups of cake batter, or you could just visually divide it evenly. If you bake these in smaller cake pans, they will bake faster. If you bake them in sheet cake pans, they will bake slower. So just be aware that the size of the cake pan changes the amount of time that it will take for them to bake. So you're just gonna have to keep an eye on it. Sometimes I use a scale to just check and see if the batter is even. 31.5, 33, 30. Oh, you get some cake batter. We're gonna go ahead and bake these cakes in the oven at 335 degrees Fahrenheit for about 40 to 45 minutes until the center is set. All right, our cakes are done. They look beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and let these cool on a cooling rack for about 10-15 minutes until the pan is cool to the touch, and then I'm gonna flip them over and cool them a little bit longer before I throw them in the freezer so that I can frost them. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and take the parchment paper off my cake, and I'm gonna wrap it in plastic wrap and put it into the freezer. I'm not trying to freeze my cakes, I just want them to cool down really fast so that I can get to the frosting part. If you don't plan on frosting your cake until tomorrow, you can just put these into the refrigerator, or you can even just leave them at room temperature until you're ready to frost them. I'm gonna take my powdered sugar, cocoa powder, I'm using Dutch, but you can use regular as well, and I'm just gonna sift those two together. Then I'm gonna add my pasteurized egg whites. Pasteurized egg whites are safe to eat without cooking. They've already been heat treated, but you cannot use fresh egg whites for this recipe. Then I'm gonna attach the whisk attachment to my stand mixer and combine that on low. After about a minute, I'm gonna bump that up to high and whip it for a good 5 minutes. If you want to use regular egg whites, check out my chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream recipe. Once that's nice and fluffy, add in your room temperature butter in chunks. Continue whipping on high for 8 to 10 minutes, and you want to get it nice and light and fluffy, so don't be afraid to really let it whip. Once it tastes like chocolate ice cream and not butter, then it's good to go. You can switch to the paddle attachment and mix on low for 15 to 20 minutes to get all the air bubbles out and make it nice and smooth and creamy, but that's totally optional. All right, so now it's time to assemble my cake. I'm just gonna level off the dome that's on top. This is great for snacking on. We're gonna add some buttercream right in the middle there. Use our offset spatula to make it nice and smooth and nice and level. All right, we're gonna smooth out that top layer, and we're just gonna put a thin layer of buttercream all the way around the cake. This is called a crumb coat, and it seals in all the crumbs of your cake so that when you put your final layer of buttercream on, we don't have any crumbs ruining that beautiful buttercream finish. I'm using an 8-inch cardboard cake round to build my cake on top of because I am a professional cake decorator. But if you are just a home cook, you can do this directly on top of a cake plate or platter, whatever you got. Okay, now we're gonna put this into the freezer for 30 minutes. All right, our cake is nice and chilled. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add on my final layer of buttercream. Start with the top, smooth that out nice and flat. The way that we make our buttercream flat is we hold our offset spatula flat. It just takes a little bit of practice. Once you have your top flat, you can go ahead and build up the sides. Now we're going to use our bench scraper to just smooth out the sides. I'm gonna hold the bench scraper straight up and down. Don't tilt it this way or this way. And we're gonna scrape slowly and then wipe off the excess. If you see any low spots or holes, just come back in with some more buttercream and fill those spots in. I'm going to use my offset spatula to just kind of smooth out the top. Just taking the spatula and bringing it just to the side of the buttercream and pressing down and making it nice and flat on top. Okay, so now at this point, you could call it done. If you're a professional cake decorator and you want to get rid of all of these little holes on the side, we got to put this back in the fridge or freezer for another 15 minutes, and then we can put a final coat on the outside. While our cake is chilling for the last time, I'm going to go ahead and make my drip. This is my 8 ounces of chocolate. This is semi-sweet chocolate, and I'm going to microwave it for 30 seconds just to kind of get it a little bit warm. And then I'm going to pour my hot cream on top, stir it until it's smooth, and I will have my easy chocolate drip. Remember to heat your cream just to the point that it is steaming, not boiling. Otherwise, your ganache drip could separate and break. All right, my milk just started to bubble, so I'm going to go ahead and pour that onto the chocolate. Push the chocolate down into the cream, and then we're going to let this set for 5 minutes before we stir. While we're waiting for our drip, I'm going to go ahead and fill in these small holes. Got my leftover buttercream and a very small offset spatula, so I can just go in and just very carefully fill in any holes and imperfections. This is a little bit more tedious than doing the final layer of buttercream, but professional bakers usually take this extra step. And we're only worrying about the side because we are going to be putting a drip over the top. So don't worry about any holes that are on the top unless you're not doing a drip. Okay, now I'm going to scrape off the excess with my bench scraper. Make sure your bench scraper is not hot, otherwise it's going to melt the buttercream a little bit and you'll have these splotchy patches on your chocolate. Make sure you wipe off your bench scraper really well between scrapings and go very slowly. And then lastly, I'm going to take my small offset once again and just sharpen up that top edge. All right, time to whisk up our drip. Just kind of push it all together at first and then start whisking until it comes together. If you have any unmelted bits of chocolate, you can put this back into the microwave for 30 seconds to just make sure everything's melted, or you can use an immersion blender to get rid of any sort of little tiny lumps. And to use this drip, I've got a piping bag here, or you could use a Ziploc bag with the corner cut if that's all you have, or you could even just use a spoon. I'm going to put the piping bag into my cup, fold the top over, put my ganache drip in there. It looks so yummy. Notice the end is not cut yet. We're not going to cut the end until we're ready to use it. All right, I'm going to show you how I transfer my cake onto the cake platter. Just take your little offset spatula, get it underneath that cake board and lift up. You can get your hands underneath there. I have a cake board here from Cake Boards of Air, or you can use whatever cake platter plate you have. A little bit of buttercream, just a very small amount. Place your cake on top. You can use your offset spatula in place of your fingers so that you can lower it down exactly where you want it to be so it's nice and centered. Actually, it's not nice and centered. Just tap the side, get it to the middle. You can use a little paper towel to just kind of clean up any excess buttercream around the bottom. If you have like a gap at the very bottom where your cake meets the board, you can take a little bit of buttercream and just pipe it in that gap, like that, so that you don't see the board. And then with your bench scraper, you can just come back again and just smooth out that little rough piece of buttercream. If your cake is sitting on top of something like a plate that doesn't have like a straight surface, you can just use your finger to smooth out the buttercream. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the tip of my chocolate. I'm gonna do a little test right in the front. Just drip it down, make sure that it's not gonna drip too far. It's definitely not gonna drip too far. It's almost too cold. Oops. All right. Drip, drip. I do like sometimes a big drip, sometimes a little drip, because I don't like it to look symmetrical. You can do it however you want. And then the extra we're just gonna put on top. And then just use your spatula to smooth it out. If you wanna get really fancy, you can do a little spiral. I start in the center, just hold my spatula down and gradually pull my spatula out. Just kind of gives a nice finish to the ganache at the top. All right, you probably have a little leftover ganache and a little leftover buttercream, and I'm actually gonna combine the two. I'm gonna mix it up, and I'm gonna make kind of like a mixture of ganache and buttercream. If it's too loose and soupy, just give it maybe another 10 minutes to set up. The last thing I'm gonna do is just pipe some rosettes on the top. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I put 2 between each one. We're done. We're time to eat the cake. Hallelujah. It was so good. I would say that the texture of this cake is kind of like the cross between a brownie and like a traditional chocolate cake. It's definitely got some, you know, like richness and fudginess, but it's not heavy at all. And that's because it's so super moist. It's amazing. If you like this recipe, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. I'm Liz Merrick, and I will see you guys next week. Bye. This counts as lunch, right?